Good morning, everybody. Jim Sturba and I shared a morning on the Diane Rehm radio show on NPR. And so now we're here today to share a morning with you. So I'm beginning to think that I'm becoming the Ed McMahon to Jim Sturba's Johnny Carson. But Jim's thoughtful analysis illustrates how modern American society doesn't always appreciate our history of conservation success. And what I'd like to do this morning is talk to you about the future and what that holds for us, about the immensity of challenge that lays in front of us, and how we need to make wildlife conservation relevant and important to a rapidly growing and changing society. So first, let's look at just a piece of the challenge that we face.
What's better, faster or slower?
Faster!
Who thinks more is better than less? What's better, doing two things at once or just one?
Two!
All right, faster versus slower, more versus less, two things versus one thing. I think you get the idea. So let's do a little role play here. I'll ask the question, and you give the answer. Right, Jim Martin?
Absolutely.
What's better, a long wait or a short wait? Short wait. Exactly. Waiting a short time is better, right? Wait a minute. Conservation is about the long term. Damn. Molly Beatty was the first director I worked for in the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. She said there's only one true conflict, and that's between short-term and long-term thinking. So friends, that's the root of the challenge facing our community today. We live in a world where fast is better than slow, where more is better than less, where two are better than one, where short-term thinking is more rewarding. This probably has always been so, but today the stakes seem so much higher. The consequences seem more enduring, and long-term thinking seems so challenging. The universe is now thought to be 13.8 billion years old. Billion years old. It wasn't until around the year 1800 when the world population hit 1 billion people. So it took all of those 13.8 billion years to get to that point. And now look at how fast we've been growing since. 1905, Theodore Roosevelt began his first term as president, and the U.S. Forest Service was founded. 2 billion people. 1929, the year my father was born, 3 billion people. 1958, 2 years after I was born, 4 billion people. 1974, the year I graduated high school, 5 billion people. 1995, the year I joined the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, 6 billion people. 2012, 7 months after I began my tenure as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Director, 7 billion people. Yes, most of this growth, and by the middle of the century, 2050, we'll be sharing this planet with 9 billion others, if we're lucky. If we're not lucky, 11 billion others. And yes, most of this growth will occur in Asia and Africa, but this is not an other world phenomenon. The good old US of A is the world's third most populous country, behind China and India. Our 315 million people will be more than 400 million by the middle of the century. And all of these new people, especially those in Asia and Africa, will aspire to be more like us, with greater access to the things that produce quality of life, electricity and education, affordable health care, food and housing, reliable and safe transportation. And they should have these things. And as they aspire to get them, they will think that faster is better than slower, more is better than less, 2 is better than 1, and a short wait is better than a long wait. More people, more affluence, that's what the future holds. So what does this mean for our work? No matter how you slice it, we're going to ask more of the planet, more food, more fiber, more fuel, more fresh water. And as we occupy more of the world's ecological space, it means less will be available for the rest of what we call biodiversity. Wish it were not so, but it is that simple. Less will be available for everything else. And we need to prepare ourselves and our great institutions to make hard choices. The byproducts of this growth in human population and affluence are familiar to all of us. Habitat destruction and fragmentation, soil erosion, water pollution and scarcity, species invasion, wildlife disease, and now a changing climate system. We don't have to look far to see the future. We can see the impact of ethanol subsidies and $8 per bushel corn today in the crisis that is unfolding in the prairie grasslands and wetlands of the Dakotas. And to meet the growing demands of the mid-century population, agricultural experts are predicting that we need to increase production of food and fiber by 70% from today's levels. We can see the future scale and pace of global trade reflected in a new generation of what they're calling post-Panamax container vessels. These immense vessels will hold 10,000 to 12,000 shipping containers, moving massive volumes of commodities, and along with them, biological contaminants like the fungi that today are threatening to decimate North American bat and amphibian populations, or hiding the contraband that is fueling a modern poaching crisis in Africa. This will be the increasing legacy of a world where fast is better than slow, where more is better than less, where 2 is better than 1, and where short wait is better than a long wait. So what does this mean for our work? It means we cannot expect that tomorrow's world will have all of today's wildlife, in all of today's diversity and abundance, and in all of today's places. It means that we'll have to make active choices. We must decide what wildlife will come along for the ride with us, in what abundance and diversity, and in what places. And a more challenging decision, what will not. This doesn't mean we're resigned to species extinction, but it does mean that we must realize that in many cases, we may not be able to prevent it. My intention is for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to be an organization that makes choices. We'll do this by entering discussions with partners, particularly our state Fish and Wildlife Agency partners, to select and pursue shared objectives. Most commonly, these will be expressed as species-based objectives, allowing us to more strategically identify and target work to conserve habitat and ecological functions. Hopefully, you've heard us speak about strategic habitat conservation and more recently about surrogate species. I don't want my remarks today to focus on how we will do this. Yes, how is important. It is technically challenging. It has weaknesses, but not making choices, not setting priorities, not focusing our work is, in my view, irresponsible. The most important thing to say about how we will do this is to say that we will do it in league with our partners, particularly our state partners, who share with us the responsibility for wildlife management. The more important thing this morning is spending a few minutes explaining why we're doing this. And there are really three reasons. First, it's about setting priorities, making sure that we are working on what is most important for the long term. Second, it's about success, because where we've done this in the past and where we're doing it today, we are successful. Third, it's about relevance to a changing American society. On setting priorities, I think we often approach conservation as an artist painting a landscape, biodiversity, and all the habitat forms it occupies are a limitless palette with which to paint, and we want to paint with all of those colors. But in his book, Steal Like an Artist, Austin Kleon tells us creativity is subtraction. Creativity is subtraction. That nothing is more paralyzing than the idea of limitless possibilities. By choosing surrogate species and imposing constraints upon ourselves, we will unlock creativity. Regarding success, think of what we've accomplished with waterfowl conservation. Millions of acres conserved, billions of dollars, hundreds of partners working together. The possible palette there is about 40-odd species of hunted waterfowl, but it was one color in the palette, the hen mallard, who nests in the prairie potholes of North America, who we first painted. She unlocked our creativity and put us on a path to success, not just for waterfowl, but for the thousands of other species who depend upon the same habitat. Think of what we're doing today with the greater sage grouse. To keep this bird off the endangered species list, we are moving those figurative mountains. The Natural Resource Conservation Service has spent $140 million over the past 3 years. Its partners have brought $70 million to the table. The Bureau of Land Management is amending resource management plans in 68 planning units, and the U.S. Forest Service in 24 others. All 11 range states are engaged, and the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and the Western Governors Association are leading these efforts. Great industries are coming to us, all of us. They want to know what they can do. We need to be able to tell them. In the end, we'll drive conservation in millions of acres across the Western landscape, and we will conserve this species along with several hundred others who use the same habitat. And we will preserve ways of life that have been a part of the Western culture for centuries. The same thing is happening for the lesser prairie chicken. The same has happened for the grizzly bear, the manatee, the Atlantic striped bass, and dozens of others. When we make choices, when we subtract, we free ourselves to do our most creative work. It's a bit counterintuitive, but it works. And it must work because we compete in a marketplace with people who have done their subtraction. They have unified goals. They're called acre feet and board feet and AUMs and bushels and barrels and megawatts. If we do the same, if we can choose a limited palette of surrogate species to focus our work, then we will succeed. Why? Well, that brings us to the issue of relevance. America is changing, as Jim Sturba reminds us, diversifying, urbanizing, gentrifying, globalizing. But there is one certainty. The America of tomorrow will be different from the one that we know today, and its people will be increasingly denatured and disconnected from the outdoors. This reality presents us with many challenges, but in this cloud of disconnection, I believe there is a silver lining. As people are more disconnected from nature, they seem more and more fascinated with wildlife, maybe because they find it increasingly mysterious. But whatever the reason, it's an opportunity for us to make conservation relevant for them. If we choose the right targets, then I believe we'll get their support. Addition and abstraction are our enemies. Subtraction and relevance are our allies. That's why the Fish and Wildlife Service is working with great partners like the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies to identify species that can serve as surrogates for the ecosystems that support them and many other species. And in the process, I believe we're defining what Arizona's Larry Voiles has called a 21st century conservation system. Change is difficult, but this effort requires not just tolerance of change, but it requires that we embrace change. Speed is essential, and that requires trust that, quite frankly, is lacking in our community today. We need to change that. Scientific credibility is our foundation. This community and its commitment to scientific excellence nurtured Aldo Leopold and Rachel Carson. Where are the scientific institutions that will create a next generation of great conservation philosophers? We need to build them. Where is the urgency and unity that created successes like the Pittman-Robertson Act and the Endangered Species Act? My goodness. Today, we can't even get the Congress to raise the price of the duck stamp in the face of a prairie crisis. We need to pass a Sportsman's Act. If we can see past the fog of short-term problems like sequestration, if we can form powerful and shared objectives built around solid science, if we can build trust, if we can invigorate a land and water conservation fund to help drive adaptation to climate change and other ecological stressors, if we can invest in leadership and leaders, then we will make conservation relevant to a changing America, and we will accomplish great things. I hope so, because by 2050, the world is going to need to meet the demands of 9 to 11 billion people. People who think fast beats slow, more beats less, 2 beats 1, and a short wait is better than a long wait. And Molly Beatty got it right. The only true conflict is between short-term and long-term thinking. So here's to playing the long game. Thank you very much.